We know that reaching our writers is so important, and we have so many different types of writers. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how to specifically support our students who have IEPs or 504 plans and have learning disabilities that really affect their writing, and how special education teachers and general education teachers, as well as administrators and coaches, can work together to make it so that we have a way to really support these students. So I was lucky enough to be able to talk to Heather Cacioppo in this episode, and she is a wealth of information on this topic. So I cannot wait to share this with you, and make sure you give her a follow after you listen to the episode. Hi, Heather. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, April. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited to talk to you today about what we can do to support our students with IEPs, with writing. So can you tell me a little bit more about what you do as a special education curriculum and assessment coordinator?
Yeah, so I help oversee 21 classrooms at a private autism school, and I support all of their curriculum needs, budgetary needs, of course, for that, and then also like state assessments, 3-year re-eval assessments. So everything in between, I kind of help oversee of like the structures that are happening in the classroom and helping our teachers get the resources and materials that they absolutely need.
That's amazing. And this is middle and high school students, right?
No, we are kindergarten through 22 in my building. So we have 21 classrooms throughout. And then we have an adult day program as well, but that is separate campus from us.
That's amazing. So as far as what you do you work a lot more with the teachers directly now than the students, or are you actively in the classroom as well?
I feel like there's a really good balance of that. It's a lot of the back end research, finding articles, finding resources for the teachers, but then also I do a lot with supporting in the classrooms about like classroom structure or giving feedback on lessons, doing observations, nothing evaluative. But I am giving teachers some suggestions of how they can better and improve their classrooms. So it's a little bit of both. And then, of course, I get to be with the kids, too, which is always really fun. And then my administration, if we are ever low staffed, like we are pushing into classrooms and being paraprofessionals for the day, which is also kind of really nice to remind me back in my roots of teaching, because I was a special education teacher for 8 years before I made this transition. So it is nice to kind of have that touch back to the classroom too.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of that back end research and development, all that is so important, but being in the classroom is the really exciting part. So I'm glad that you get to get back in there every once in a while.
Yeah, and it does. It really helps build trust with the teachers as well, of like, I'm not just a person on the outside giving suggestions. Like I actually know their students. I know their students' deficits and areas of growth that we can truly continue to improve on.
Now, are these classrooms really small class size, or are there quite a few students in each class?
Yeah, we try to keep our classrooms around that 8 number. Some classrooms have more, some classrooms have less. It really depends on their needs and what's going on in that classroom. But yeah, for the most part, most of our classrooms have 8 students.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about IEPs, dyslexia, autism, but anything else that you want to discuss, you can absolutely jump in on. We have so many different students to support. So I know that anything that you share to help these kiddos will be super helpful for all of our teachers listening, not just the ones who are special education teachers.
Yeah, for sure. Because I feel like even general education teachers are seeing more of those types of students in their classrooms, whether they have a 504 plan or an IEP. They're starting to do a lot more inclusion lately.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's wonderful, but we have to equip teachers with the skills to reach these students. So I think this is going to be really valuable discussion because I know that, and I might draw back from your experience in another school, because I know you probably met with students with a lot of different learning disabilities and worked with students that didn't have autism. But I know that there's such a scope there. It just varies so much for those kids too. So just let me know what you think is how you want to guide this conversation, whatever you're most passionate about. But I had really geared it towards talking a lot about ADHD, dyslexia, and students with autism, because those are the kids that I see the most that really need our help when it comes to writing instruction and writing goals.
Yeah, without a doubt. There's just a ton out there, and really it is individualized for that student and whatever they need and where it's going. But I will give as many suggestions as I can for any of those diagnoses.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about IEPs, because that's I think the first touch point that a lot of our teachers have with these students is they see the IEP and they see the goals a lot of times before they even see the student. So from the writing perspective of it, what are some writing goals that you might want to see on an IEP for a student who struggles with writing?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different ways that you can look at that. I obviously want to look at the deficits. Where is the student lacking the skills? Is it sentence structures? Is it elaborating on their sentences? Is it organization and they need a graphic organizer? Is it more of staying on topic? So there's lots of different routes and ways that you can go. And of course, we're seeing lots of students now not getting the writing instruction that they actually need. And so when it comes to goals, what is most important for that student? Is it going to be the organization of it? Is it going to be sentence structures and understanding that sentences should be longer or have certain things in them? Is it going to be more capitalization and punctuation? Things like that. And so what is most important for that student? And you need to take into consideration their grade level as well. Like I said, I work with young primary students all the way up into adulthood. And so what is most important for them really depends on where they are in their life as well. I'm really not going to spend a lot of time, I don't know, talking about something with an adult that maybe would be more beneficial for a primary student. So it just really kind of depends of where those deficits are.
Yeah, and I agree that probably with a lot of your adult learners, you're looking at what tools you can provide to help them, really tackle these real life situations where they're having to do writing, or they're having to communicate in some way. And so you're right, it is very individualized, not just on their skill level, but what they need and their age. So I think it's wonderful that your school has someone that's there to support the teachers and the students in that way. And I know that, most elementary schools in particular don't really have somebody to help. So a lot of times we're seeing students come through with writing deficits and they have no goals for writing.
Yep.
And where they could really benefit from simple things like letter formation, handwriting practice, pencil grip, and then, like you said, sentence structure. And for some of our students, it's just the idea generation that they struggle with. So you're absolutely right. It does need to be individualized. But I am concerned that a lot of the testing that goes on in schools when we're testing students and looking at their IEPs initially doesn't really incorporate writing, or doesn't even incorporate enough of the teacher's input, because the teachers are the ones that are there every day seeing where those deficits are. Yeah,
I completely agree. It is. And I think there's a moment too that teachers aren't taught writing instruction of how to explicitly teach it sometimes, which is why I just picked up your book as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there's like lack of curriculum, especially for special education, that's accessible. Yes, a lot of our students are having struggles with holding a pencil and understanding like pencil to paper type tasks, but beyond tracing, because we know there's importance beyond tracing. And the lack of resources, materials, curriculum in special education world shows that sometimes teachers don't follow through with that because they don't know where to start. They don't know where to go. And that is definitely a gap just in, I know, the world of special education, but I'm seeing it fade even more with the general education population.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that. And there's just an overwhelming amount of information that general education teachers need to take in. And unfortunately, sometimes there's that disconnect between them and the special education team, whereas they really do need to be a team that works together. And I've seen some fantastic teams of special education and general education teachers make a huge difference with students. So if we can make that a priority when it comes to any sort of instruction, but Of course, this is about writing instruction. So if we can make that a priority with writing instruction and give the tools to the general education teachers and the special education teachers and have them communicate, I think that would really make a huge difference because our kids need these skills. I mean, reading and writing is so important. Math is important, science, socialize, it's all important. But the reading and writing skills are the skills that they're going to use the most in their real life. And so a lot of our students we're seeing them be so far behind in writing that I'm very concerned that they won't be able to properly create a resume or communicate with someone at their job, write an email, these things that they need to do in their everyday lives. And we know for our students with IEPs, things are already harder for them as it is. So I think the best way we can support them is to make sure that they have quality writing goals that are really tailored to them and make sure that the teachers know how to address those goals.
Yeah, I think you really hit it on the head with the collaboration piece because there is a disconnect of what's going on with general education classrooms, with special education classrooms, and the understanding of what's happening in each of those programs. So the more that you can collaborate with counterparts to get the resources, to get the materials, to go through what explicit writing instruction looks like, it really could benefit our students so much more.
So what would be your recommendation if there's a general education teacher out there that sees that his or her special education students really have these writing deficits, and they're not really sure how best to work with the special education team? What would be the best way for them to approach that?
Yeah, I think writing samples are always a great way to bring it and show exactly what it looks like. Don't be afraid to have that conversation. I know there might be some hesitancy originally, but continue to bring it up that there is a lack of understanding or a lack of structure in their writing or whatever you are seeing. Bringing student work samples, letting them see that, because that's the best way we're going to be able to test all these things is when it goes into practice, what does it actually look like? And if there is a moment where the teacher goes, well, I don't know how to teach that, or I don't know how to support them, right? Use each other's knowledge to gain those skills to really brainstorm best ways to support your students.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, like you had said, that disconnect is really them not knowing what's happening. So the special education teacher doesn't know what's happening in the general ed classroom and then vice versa. And I've had a lot of teachers who have told me that their biggest issue is that they'll be giving writing instruction and they want to incorporate those skills, but they'll have a student who's pulled for math during that time. And so there's really no coordination of who's teaching what, how is that child getting that skill? And that, I guess that's overall a scheduling issue, and it's tricky. Like there's no easy solution there, especially when you have one special education teacher and 5 grade levels. But any recommendations that you can provide for how they can better communicate to really make sure that they're getting those skills, and one teacher is not thinking the other teacher's doing it, and then they're thinking general ed's doing it, and then the kid's just missing it.
Yeah, it's definitely communication and collaboration, understanding what is actually happening when the student is there and when the student is not there, what they might be missing if they're going out for related services. So yes, communication is definitely the key. But if that's not feasible or it's just not happening, something else that I recommend is if your school is allowing you to get a sub for the day and then you go and shadow your students. Like, what does their day look like? When they are outside of your classroom, what instruction is actually happening? Because then you can be kind of like a fly on the wall and see, is there accommodations that need to be put into place? Is there something that's missing? Or maybe the student can't hear all the way in the back of the room. You can be just another set of eyes and ears. And then you get to see exactly what's happening, what instruction they're getting, what instruction they're missing. And just, again, be that fly on the wall, which is kind of really funny to be a part of sometimes when you're like, wait a second, I had no idea you had to go to speech and this is right in the middle of writer's workshop. Like, had no idea. And so finding sneaky ways in your schedule to bring that back in, because obviously related service minutes need to be met. But if there is a moment for a morning meeting or a homeroom or a study hall in that student's day, just making sure they're still getting some of that direct instruction there.
Yeah, I think that without fail, what teachers are saying in the general education classroom is their students are getting pulled for services during that instructional time. And that's their biggest, I guess, hurdle to making sure that they get what they need. And so to me, that I think is a leadership issue with the school, where I think principals and coaches should really be making sure that our special education or general education teachers are a team and try to sync those schedules as much as possible and try to cross plan as much as possible. So having our special education team be completely separate should no longer be a thing. They need to work together. I remember when I was first teaching, we would do in-services and our special education team would be completely separate planning, and general education would be doing planning and different trainings. But that makes no sense because, they are working together with the same kids. So, and having a consistent curriculum for both and communicating who's teaching what can be really powerful as well if you can't work out the schedule kinks.
Yeah, because there could be a moment too that you're like, okay, I'm on Unit 2, Lesson 7. Okay, if they're going to miss that, then I can make sure that I'm on, the same lesson to teach that to them when they come back to my class, or find a moment to pull them aside and do some more direct instruction with it. Because it's all about communication of, yes, we know schedules get really tight and we can't always fit everything in every single day. But we need to be flexible sometimes of what that looks like. So yes, if they are in ELA with you or language arts, if there can be a 15-minute block that you can really hit some of those skills that they might be missing, 15 minutes goes a long way as it continues to add up as the school year goes on.
Yes, it really does. And a lot of times with these students, they just need a solid, 15 minutes to really address one key thing, whether it's, something simple like sentence structure, or learning where to place the letters on the line, which is a skill that a lot of teachers don't even think about, that students who have never done that before, they don't know where to put letters. So it's definitely a foundational skill in kindergarten, but you see that even with our older students who struggle with reading and writing, or spacing and letter formation, those things. So how do you think, what role do you think the parents can have when it comes to being a part of the IEP process? And for any parents who are listening, who have a child with an IEP, who are thinking, my student really struggles with writing, what kind of goals should I be looking for? How do I bring this to their teachers to make sure that they're getting the help that they need?
Yeah, I think sometimes coming with a solution in mind of a goal of where you want that child to be or your child to be. So say you write thank you cards every holiday or every birthday. And so you want to make sure your child knows how to write their own thank you cards. And that's important to you. That is an outcome that you can bring to the table and say, this is something we do at home. This is something we believe in. We believe that this is important. It doesn't have to be that. It could be writing an email, sending a text message, make it more meaningful for their life. Because yes, they're going to have to learn how to write an email, and there's structure to an email that needs to be there. And if we're not there yet and they can't produce an email, then we go back. Okay, we talk about letters in words and how they have certain, sequences to make a word, or spacing, or whatever they are missing, those foundational skills. And then we build up as they get older. You don't have to start with the goal of writing an email. You start with the foundational things that an email needs before you build up to that. It would be the same thing if you used a math goal or a reading goal. We don't always start with the student doing multiplication. They might need to learn how to do addition first. And so we just understand this is the goal and this is where we want to be. But we're not quite there yet. So there might be some steps along the way, and it might take a couple years to get them to those end results.
Yeah, and I can see parents getting frustrated because they're seeing their child come home and they don't have those skills. So I think the communication is really key there between the parents and the teams as well, to see not only what steps the student needs to take to get to that goal, but how they're being supported in the classroom. Again, I think it comes down to that communication. And in a perfect world, we would have communication between all of our teams, our teachers, our principals, our students, their families, but that's not always the case. So, but from the parent perspective, I think it's great to work with a team where you can say, this is where I want my child to be. How do we get there? So I completely agree with that. So as far as seeing our students and assessing our students and tracking their progress, what do you recommend teachers do? Because we know that most of these students are not going to be on grade level. So providing them a grade level grade doesn't really give information that is helpful.
Yeah. Writing samples, I think, is the best way to do it. Tell the student, write a sentence, write your name. Beyond the, like, I'm going to write a sentence and you copy it. Like, I want your own thoughts, your own production coming through so that we can see kind of where you're at. Is your letter formation off? Is the spacing off? Is sentence structure off? Are we not using punctuation or capitalization? And so I feel like that is the best way to test it, is just in the moment, finding that opportunity of, okay, write about what you did this weekend. Beyond circling answers. Okay, I went to the movies. Okay, great. Which movie did you see? Let's elaborate on it. And right then and there, you're teaching instruction, but then you also are understanding, like, this is where they're at. And there's more that we can do with it. So really just taking that time to just sit down and just put it in their day.
Yeah, I agree. Writing samples are the best, especially when you're meeting, whether it's an IEP meeting or you're just doing general conferences, being able to show, here's what the writing sample looked like at the beginning of the year, and here's what it looks like now. Because we know that they're not going to be at grade level. So if we hand them a report card, that's not helpful information. But seeing that growth from one sample to the next, that's really powerful, not only for families and teachers and the child to see, I am growing at my own pace. And so I completely agree with that. And I think that, with these students who really struggle with writing, whether it's because they have dyslexia or ADHD or autism, that they have great pride seeing the improvement, but we have to point it out, because a lot of times things are so hard for them. They get stuck in that thought process of, I'm just not smart. This is too hard. But if we're pointing it out and showing them, look at how much you've grown, they get that sense of pride and they work so hard.
Yeah. And I think I've seen it too, a lot more of, like, if I let them write about what they want to write about, I let their interests come in, or they share about their family or something personal to them, then they're more willing to do some writing for me, rather than, okay, you have to write about school lunches. Like, students don't want to write about school lunches. They would much rather write about what they did this weekend, or who they were with, or what movie they just saw. And those types of things can really kind of give you some insight too of their life. And then you can build rapport with them, and then they're more likely to do more things with you, because they've built that kind of trust with you as well.
Yeah, that's true. And you could really build off of what they are interested in, as well as, like you said, learning a little bit more about what's going on and making those connections. And I know that for some of our students who have really strong family unit, sending them with, questions or writing piece home to share can be really powerful. But for a lot of our students who struggle with writing, I noticed that the idea generation phase, where they're discussing, they're reading stories about the topic, or you're reading it to them, or they're engaging in some sort of multimedia, they'll get really excited, so that when they get to that point of writing, they're more ready and able. Whereas if you just sit down and say, okay, write a sentence or write a paragraph, then they kind of freeze up because they don't have the ideas yet. They're not super excited about it. And all they're thinking about is how hard it is, instead of thinking, oh, I'm so interested in this topic because I read about it. I listened to a video on it. I talked to my friend about it. So I think that those engagement strategies that work well with our general ed population work great with our special education students, who absolutely just need a little bit of extra grease to get them ready for the writing process.
Yeah. And it's a big test for them a lot of the times. When you say, go do writing, you're write me a paragraph. It's overwhelming. I don't know where to start. I don't have any ideas. I don't want to share anything. And so, yeah, giving those the moments of like, okay, let's watch a video on it or talk to a friend about what you just saw. All those types of engagement things that you brought up. It does truly make a difference.
Yeah. And scaffolding is really important with these students. And I think that's where, when they're in the general education classroom and they're participating in a writing activity, having modifications for them and knowing how to modify content is really important. But a lot of teachers don't get that training. And so that's where we see those students fall behind or get frustrated. Whereas they're usually pretty simple things, as long as, the teacher knows how to do it. Things like sentence stems. There's so many ways to support these students. But again, like you said, there's not all the training and materials. So I'm glad we're able to talk about it, because I'm hoping that will spur a lot of teachers to say, hey, I have a student in my class who has dyslexia or dysgraphia or ADHD. What can I do with this child during my regular whole group lessons that will help support them and have them be a part of our group and be successful?
Yeah. And sometimes it's just that question that you have to stop for a moment and say, like, what would help in this moment? Like, how can I make this better or more accessible for that student, but then also probably for more students than just that one student you're thinking of?
Absolutely. A lot of the modifications that we make for students who are struggling writers are great for all of our students. So there's really no reason not to. So what would be your final piece of advice for any teacher who's really looking to help a student with a learning disability when it comes to writing instruction?
Yeah, I think for me, there's a couple things that come to mind. It's working backwards. So where do you want their IEP goals to be? And what are we working towards? And like, what's the meaning behind that thought of why we're making that writing goal? Like, does it relate to writing an email or sending a text message or writing a letter to grandma? Whatever it is that you want to work towards, like, work backwards from there. And then also, is it a deficit? Are we still seeing that there's an area of concern or area for growth that we are seeing? Those are really the two that I come and think of when it's like, does this make sense? And is this meaningful?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise. I know that this conversation is going to get a lot of teachers thinking about what they can do to support their students.
Yeah, and they're happy to reach out to me if they want more information or to ask questions about writing instruction in special education.
Well, why don't you tell us how people can find you to learn more about supporting their students?
For sure. You can find me at fullspedahead.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Heather. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.